Good morning Forex market participants. I'm Erica Trina from Sen Securities. I hope everyone is feeling energized and ready to dive into something monumental today. In our interactions this morning, we're going to talk about a defining moment in economic history that completely reshaped the global financial system as we know it. I'm referring to the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. You may wonder why something that happened so long ago still matters in today's fast-paced world of foreign exchange trading. The answer is simple: the decisions made at Bretton Woods laid the foundation for the entire structure of modern currency markets, global trade, and economic policy coordination. Let's set the stage. Picture the world in the early 1940s. World War II was still raging, and the global economy was in ruins. Major economies were battered, currency systems were in disarray, and international trade had been severely disrupted. The aftermath of the Great Depression still lingered in the collective memory. Countries had been devaluing their currencies left and right in desperate attempts to compete for trade, erecting protectionist barriers and engaging in economic isolationism. These measures only worsened the crisis, deepened global poverty, and, in part, led to the catastrophic war that was still unfolding. So, by the time the war was winding down in 1944, global leaders knew they had to do something radical to ensure the world didn't slip back into economic chaos. They needed a system that would promote stability and cooperation, something that could prevent the economic disintegration that had so badly crippled the world in the 1930s. The Bretton Woods Conference, officially known as the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, was called to address this problem, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The conference took place in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, a serene little town that played host to one of the most significant gatherings of minds in modern financial history. From July 1 to July 22, 1944, representatives from 44 allied nations came together with one mission: to create a new international monetary system. Now, the key players in these discussions were the United States and the United Kingdom. The two men who dominated the negotiations were British economist John Maynard Keynes and U.S. Treasury official Harry Dexter White. These two had very different visions of what the post-war economic order should look like, and their debates were intense, but their collaboration led to the framework that would shape the global economy for the next few decades. The first thing that had to be decided was how to achieve currency stability. Back then, the gold standard was still a familiar concept, but it had shown its limits during the interwar years. Countries that followed the gold standard were often constrained in their economic policies, unable to adjust their currencies in response to domestic economic conditions. That rigidity was one of the reasons the global economy had spiraled out of control during the Great Depression. Yet, at the same time, abandoning the gold standard entirely had its own risks. Leaders at Bretton Woods were aiming for a system that could provide the stability of gold while allowing for the flexibility necessary to manage modern economies. Their solution? They came up with what we now call the gold exchange standard. Under this new system, the US dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. All other currencies, in turn, were pegged to the US dollar, meaning that their value was indirectly tied to gold through the dollar. This made the dollar the central currency in the global system, effectively positioning the US as the world's economic anchor. Think about it for a moment. The US dollar became the currency of choice for international trade and finance, and it remains the global reserve currency to this day. Now, you might ask, why the dollar? At that point, the United States had emerged as the strongest economy in the world. It had the largest industrial base, the greatest productivity, and, most importantly, the largest gold reserves. Other countries trusted the US to maintain the dollar's value, and they were willing to peg their currencies to it. This arrangement was seen as a way to ensure global monetary stability while also allowing for some flexibility in managing exchange rates. Unlike the rigid gold standard of the past, countries under the Bretton Woods system could adjust their exchange rates if they faced fundamental disequilibrium, though they needed approval from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, which brings me to the next major development. One of the most important outcomes of the Bretton Woods Conference was the creation of two powerful institutions, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which we now know as the World Bank. These two institutions were designed to manage and support the global financial system that Bretton Woods was establishing. The IMF was set up to monitor the international monetary system, helping countries stabilize their currencies and providing financial assistance to nations facing short-term balance of payments crises. Basically, the IMF was designed to be the world's financial safety net. If a country ran into trouble, it could turn to the IMF for a loan, allowing it to stabilize its economy without resorting to the drastic measures like devaluing its currency or implementing protectionist policies that had been so disastrous in the past. The idea was to keep the global economy flowing smoothly by ensuring that countries could meet their international payment obligations. At the same time, the World Bank had a different focus. Its original mission was to help rebuild Europe and Japan after the devastation of World War II. It provided long-term loans for reconstruction projects, building infrastructure, restoring industries, and getting war-torn economies back on their feet. As time went on, its role expanded, and today the World Bank is more focused on promoting economic development in poorer countries, financing projects like roads, schools, and power plants, and working to reduce global poverty. So, with the US dollar at the center of this new monetary system, and with the IMF and World Bank providing support and oversight, the world entered a new era of economic cooperation. The Bretton Woods system aimed to combine the best aspects of a fixed exchange rate system, stability and predictability, with the flexibility needed to manage modern economies. Under this system, countries would be expected to maintain fixed exchange rates with the dollar, but they had the ability to adjust these rates if their economies got into serious trouble. This gave nations a degree of flexibility while still promoting global monetary stability. For Forex traders like you, imagine how predictable and stable the market must have seemed during the early years of the Bretton Woods system. Exchange rates were fixed, and the US dollar was as good as gold. However, this stability didn't last forever. While the Bretton Woods system initially succeeded in fostering economic growth and stability in the post-war years, by the 1960s, cracks started to appear. The US began to face rising inflation, and its balance of payments deficits put pressure on the dollar. As more and more dollars circulated globally, confidence in the US commitment to maintaining the dollar's convertibility to gold began to wane. After all, there was only so much gold in the US reserves, and at some point, countries worried that the US might not be able to honor its promise to exchange dollars for gold at the fixed rate. Countries like France, led by President Charles de Gaulle, started converting their dollar reserves into gold, creating a run on US gold reserves. This put even more pressure on the system, and eventually, it became clear that something had to give. The tipping point came in 1971 when President Richard Nixon announced that the US would no longer convert dollars into gold. This decision, known as the Nixon shock, effectively ended the Bretton Woods system. Currencies began to float freely, and exchange rates were determined by market forces rather than being pegged to the dollar or gold. The end of the Bretton Woods system marked the beginning of the modern era of floating exchange rates, which is the system that Forex traders operate in today. Currencies fluctuate based on supply and demand, interest rates, inflation, and a myriad of other factors, creating opportunities and risks for those who trade in the global market. While the Bretton Woods system itself no longer exists, its legacy lives on in the institutions it created and in the fundamental principles of economic cooperation it promoted. The IMF and World Bank continue to play crucial roles in the global financial system, stabilizing economies and promoting development. And even though we now operate in a world of floating exchange rates, the desire for stability, predictability, and international cooperation that drove the creation of Bretton Woods remains as relevant as ever. In conclusion, the Bretton Woods Agreement was a watershed moment that shaped the global economy and foreign exchange markets in ways that still resonate today. It created a framework that fostered stability and cooperation in a world recovering from war, and although the fixed exchange rate system it established has long since been abandoned, the institutions and ideals it left behind continue to influence the world economy. As Forex traders, understanding the history of Bretton Woods gives you valuable insight into how global currency systems evolve and why cooperation among nations remains critical to maintaining stability in international markets. May you all have a great trading day. Thank you.